Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 45 here at the Beer Enthusiasts and episode 3 in our series of interviewing as many Master Cicerones as we can. I'm Chris Crow, joined as usual by Master Cicerone Scott Fielder. And today we are incredibly excited to welcome Master Cicerone Brian Reed. We got a bunch of questions about your personal quest for the certifications, and we have some fun questions in the latter half. But Brian, please introduce yourself to everybody.
For sure. Thank you guys for having me on. I'm Master Cicerone. I was number 14, I think. Passed the exam back in 2017. Long time brewer, beer educator, now beer marketer. Worked in the industry for let me do the mental math here. Over 15 years at this point, right? Closer to 20. That's the elevator speech, I guess.
Love it.
This is somewhat of a kind of homecoming, if you will, with Brian. I mean, we've known Brian since the pandemic, and Brian helped us on our way to advanced, and we even were able to somehow convince him to do some tasting practice stuff with us, and he was like, oh, okay, I guess, like, why not? I'll join back up. And it's funny being on the other side, because now I'm as someone who's passed the exam and I'm not studying, I'm like, so is anybody going to ask me to like help and like study and do some tasting practice? Like I'm kind of missing it a little bit. Like
it'll come for sure. I mean, yeah, the amount of times like, and I'm not nearly as active on, social media as I was certainly probably during, I think all of us were probably a little too obsessed with social media during the pandemic because we were all staring at our phones, right? Doom scrolling every day. We still are to a certain extent, but I think, I was a lot more active on there and just, I was at a different place in my life. My kids were really young. Like, I was working from home more, your just life changes and evolves, obviously. But I was a lot more involved in the scene, right? In the craft beer scene than I am today. I still am, but not as, living it every day as I was then. And I still get requests coming out of the woodwork for, hey, can you do this? Or when it's friends, when it's, people like you guys, like always, yes, I love doing this type of stuff, but the amount of you'll start getting, I'm sure, coming out of the woodwork from just complete strangers, like, can you do this work for free? You're like, no, thank you. But yeah, no, this type of stuff's super fun.
So the first thing we kind of like to start with is there's definitely a mystery kind of around the exam. And is there something that you kind of see that seems to be kind of misunderstood about the exam or kind of misinterpreted about the exam? It could be, some sort of, kind of far-fetched of rumor that people think, comes with the exam or about the exam or the day of it, the exam. Is there something that you've just kind of heard that just kind of makes you chuckle and think, wow, that's nothing. That is nothing like what it actually is.
I can tell you some of the misnomers that, and misunderstandings that I had. And I guess some.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great
come
too.
To my head. Also, I got to probably provide a little bit of context. Like the last time I took the exam was like over 10 years. The first time I took the exam, because it did take me 3 times to pass. The first time I took the exam was over a decade ago now, right? The amount of information that was out there about it was like really extraordinarily low at the time. I did work with somebody who had taken the exam, so I had that person to lean on. I had, I hunted down people online, like, hey, tell me about what to expect. Because the first time I took the exam, I did not know what to expect. And it's not a misnomer. It's something that is just a reality of that you have to face when you first decide you're going to take on this kind of like, not to lend too much hyperbole, but like when you decide to take on this like Mount Everest type of insane task, you start poking around and you realize when you look at the syllabus is everything is on the table. Right. In terms of like, there's not a question about beer or beer adjacent topics that you could be asked on this exam, whether it be in essay format or, an oral exam or whatever that would feel out of left field. But one thing that I spent an inordinate amount of time on, I remember when I studied the first time around, was a lot of agricultural topics like hop cultivation and crossbreeding. And like I spent an enormous amount of time on that, mostly because I was just going down avenues kind of willy-nilly, and then if I found something that was interesting to me, I would obviously go further down that rabbit hole. And then I went on the exam. First time I took the exam, I was like, well, that wasn't on there at all. That was out 20 hours I wasted, or however much. I might be exaggerating, but another one was history, right? I'm a big beer history buff and I was never a history person growing up. I was never one of those kids that was like wanted to learn a ton about the Titanic or the Civil War or something. But I really developed a love for history through the lens of beer, like later in life and in my, let's say in my mid 20s, late 20s. And there was absolutely goose egg in terms of history on this exam, and I think that's pretty much what you can expect. Like, a lot of folks are like, you have to know everything about the origins of all these beer styles. And like, yes and no, because there's that difference between knowledge and understanding, and having the knowledge is a stepping stone to really understanding a topic. So knowing the origins is important, but you're not going to have to sit there and write essays on remember dates and names and things like that. So that was one thing that I was like, boy, I spent a lot of time on that I didn't need to.
That is by far, of all of the people that I've coached, even just for any of the upper level exams, that is by far the thing that they are the most excited to write about, that I have to tell them you will never have to. Maybe you might get asked who's credited with being the first producer of X historical beer style.
Sure.
But that you can kind of put into the commercial example bucket, right? Like producers,
right.
It is history. It does involve some history, but it's also fits into styles and commercial. There is a larger umbrella that really they're drawing from, and it's not what order of monks were the ones who developed this original Doppelbock or whatever. Or, there's nothing. Nothing.
You're not going down that path too much. Like, you're not going to have to talk about whether yay or nay, whether George Hodgson was really that influential in the marketing the first India Pale Ale or whatever. But I love that stuff, and so I went down that rabbit hole a lot on the first time around, because I didn't really have anybody there to provide much direction for me. Yeah. One other one I will say, this I think is a bit of I'll just say kind of a coping mechanism for folks who haven't passed the exam or have given up on it or have some degree of frustration or something around it. It's hard. It's hard as hell. Like, for, it's really genuinely extremely difficult for people who either don't want to, because why would you want to take this exam besides if you were besides being like a sadomasochist or something? I'm being a little bit facetious, but it also is a little bit true. It's like 30% true, 40% true. But like, a lot of times people who don't want to take it or are intimidated by it or decide after, one go or whatever, they're not interested, will a lot of times be like, well, they just decided they didn't want to pass me or whatever. They'll give some sort of, I've heard a lot of people say like, well, it's because I work for this company or I do this or I've been outspoken about this. And it's like, nah, that's really is not part of it at all. I mean, I've graded essays for the master exam for a better part of a decade now. It's all blind coded. You have no idea whose essay you're grading, and then the folks who are doing your oral examination stuff, like, they probably have no idea who you are in most instances. And of course, the beers that you're tasting, that has nothing to do with it. There's not that degree of subjectivity. I think it's because that Psalm documentary that came out, like, it felt like it was very I know nothing of that world, by the way, so I'm speaking out of school here, but it felt like that environment was very political and very incestuous, and it's like, no, everyone knows everyone, and everyone who's worked with the Master Cicerone world is not really like that. So there is really no political agenda for the folks who are grading. So that's one thing I hear people say occasionally that I'm just like, that's just not true.
That's so interesting. You mentioned, maybe 30 to 40% of taking this exam is just masochism, just like,
it's
something...
just like I have dad issues, right?
It's
like my dad said I was stupid when I was little, so like I have to prove him wrong. I would joke about that when I was preparing for the exam with friends, and the gentlemen who now own the program, Jason Pratt and Dan Imdak, are good friends of mine, and this was decade plus before they purchased the program and took it over from Ray Daniels and all that stuff. I remember when we were preparing for it, we would joke a lot about this. It's like, why are we torturing ourselves like that? When somebody would say, hey, you didn't really do very well in that descriptor, I'd be like, fuck you, Dad. It's just like, because this is just actually something deep seated inside me. You know what I mean? This feeling of inadequacy that I have to prove that,
I think a lot of us have that, and I want to bracket off reasons you took the exam for a second and ask about that other 60 to 70% of justifications. Why do you think people should even attempt this exam, if at all? Maybe your answer's mixed. I don't know.
I mean, it depends on what you want out of it. right? I mean, I think there is a certain type of person who is maybe where they want to be in their career. Maybe they work in beer, maybe they don't work in beer. And I think this is constantly evolving, right? Because working in the craft beer industry, the reality of that right now is extraordinarily different than it was 8 years ago, 6 years ago, let alone 15, 20, right? I think there is a category of candidates. They like the challenge of it. I used the analogy already. They want to climb that Mount Everest. I think there's also a lot of other folks who are like, hey, this is going to make my career, which I think it absolutely can. But I think what it means is very much evolving in the beer industry. I'll use mine for an example. I started taking the exam because I was a beer educator by trade. I was very fortunate to have a role on the beer education team at what was then Miller Coors, and they had a world-class beer education program there. And we had a really strong group of folks who had a passion for beer and brewing sciences and sensory and beer and food pairing and all those things. And we also had a really, I think, healthy, fun competition and camaraderie amongst us. Dan and Jason being two big parts of that. They weren't the only people on the team. We have a guy named Mark Crouch, who's an advanced Cicerone, Victoria Tonini, who's I think on the cider side now. She's also a sommelier, so she kind of went to that side of the business. Megan Mayer. So a bunch of us who are really passionate about beer education and craft beer in general. And so this was like another stepping stone for us. I think for a lot of folks who are aspiring beer educators, I think this can absolutely be a foot in the door almost anywhere. I've been very fortunate in that I already had a career in beer education, and then I eventually switched to the commercial side. Actually, I started out as a brewer, and then I realized like brewing is hard work and is repetitive. I don't mind hard work, but somebody who doesn't want to do actual like physical labor on a daily basis, like I would not begrudge them that, but I do enjoy that part of it. The thing I didn't like about it is the repetitive nature of making wort every day, day in and day out. It's just not how my brain works. So I really gravitate more towards the commercial side of the business. I was fortunate that I already had that path. I was already down that path, right? When I started taking the Master Cicerone exam. But there's been tons of, I guess, opportunities that have just kind of popped out without me having to pursue them from taking the Master Cicerone exam. I will say very candidly that those have become a lot more infrequent in recent years. Not gone away, but have become infrequent, especially in the first, let's call it 4 years after I passed the exam. So 2017, let's say, to early 2020s, I would get a lot of opportunities that would just kind of fall into my lap from a beer education standpoint, just because somebody would find my name somewhere, or somebody would mention to, hey, I heard you do this, would you come speak at this conference, or come do a beer and food pairing event at this, whatever the scenario was. In recent years, that has taken a step back. And I think that is emblematic of where the craft beer industry is right now. I'm not, I don't think speaking out of school to say that like we're struggling right now as an industry. Beer in general, right? I work for a big brewer and everyone is struggling. The category is struggling right now. But I can't tell you how frequently I get either introduced to people or new business relationships come up, and I don't lead with it because it's, I don't know, makes me feel uncomfortable or braggadocious. But like, I can't tell you how frequently people will say like, oh, hey, this is Brian, blah, blah, blah. Start introducing and be like, and they'll mention the certification. And I will usually meet it with mixed feelings because, like I said, it feels good for somebody to say something nice about you. But at the same time, it's like, kind of makes you feel a little uncomfortable, at least for me it does. But what it tells people, I think, is like, hey, this person's pretty smart, right? They're pretty capable. They know what they're talking about. That alone will open a lot of doors for you.
That makes all the sense in the world. I want to go back to when you're just started sort of concertedly studying for the exam. And it sounds like you had a pretty tight group that you were doing some studying with. In particular, you mentioned Jason and Dan, and I have kind of a two-parter here. The first is, was that study group sort of engineered, or did it come together because you were all interested in going for master? And then Can you walk us through your study dynamic, considering kind of like what kind of things you guys would do together versus study solo, and how that may have changed after some of you passed the exam, and some of you are still going?
I had a really great group, even beyond those guys. I'm from Pittsburgh. That's where I live now. I say Pittsburgh, but I'm 45 minutes outside Pittsburgh. I live in Western Pennsylvania, right? Greater Pittsburgh area. And I've been involved in brewing. Like I said, I started as a brewer here, beer writer and brewer back in the first decade of the century, right? It seems like it's so long ago, but 20 years ago, I was part of a really devoted homebrew community and a really talented homebrew community. So it was one of those scenarios where you had a lot of really sharp, really dedicated people who were pushing each other. I know you guys have experienced this, and I've seen you experience this firsthand. And I think a lot of folks will have an example of where they've experienced this. You're around people who are really good and really passionate, and then that pushes you. And that's what the homebrew community was in Pittsburgh, especially in 2008 to 2015. I couldn't give the beer away fast enough to empty my corny kegs. I was obsessed. And we had a really great core group of 10 to 12 people who were like that. So we started meeting monthly or even more frequently than that. And we would just bring beers and just solicit feedback. I should say also, we were all BJCP judges already. So I was already a BJCP certified beer judge with a national tasting rank before I ever took any of the Cicerone exams. But that showed me what a great group like that can do for you. Really the definition of rising tides raise all ships. When I moved to Milwaukee for the beer educator role, Jason lived in Chicago. He lived in Denver for a while there, and then he ended up moving to Chicago. Dan lived in Denver at the time. He lives in California now. We had somebody on our beer education team who had taken the exam in the past. Whenever we started working with the Cicerone program to get everyone in the Miller Coors commercial organization certified beer server level, that's what really took us down that path, right? This was before the advanced exam existed. We kind of toyed with the idea for a while, and I can't really remember if myself or Jason, because I remember Jason was a little skeptical at first about it. Jason's also and he may or may not listen to this.
I mean, we're probably going to try and interview him. So
yeah, he's annoyingly smart, right? Pisses me off smart. He's one of those guys. I love Jason. He's a great friend, has been for a long time. I talk to him and Dan, pretty frequently, just to give him a call to catch up type of thing. Jason's one of those people who's he's so good at everything, it just pisses you off, right? So I was I want to take this, I want to do this thing, and he was I don't know, maybe. Then we both took it. I took it first. I came really close. I have to go back and look. I've told this story 100 times now. I can't remember the number, but I was it was 83.6 or something, right? I was really close the first time. And then Jason took it, I believe it was the following year, nailed it first time, right? I met Dan taking the exam, and we didn't work together. Dan and Jason had met. He was hey, this guy's taking the exam. We should talk with him and stuff. And then the first time I ever met Dan was at the exam. And we sat after day one, I think it was at day one, when they used to do it at Goose Clybourne, and sat at the pub and drank beer and just kind of commiserated about our experience. Might have been day two, actually. But anyway, that's how I met Dan. Neither of us passed, right? And then we both kind of went down the path of okay, we're going to get there. And Jason had already passed. Jason is a great teacher. He's extraordinarily knowledgeable, but he's also one of those people who's a freak. He also is a biochem, has a master's degree in biochemistry and molecular genetics or some shit. So he's forgot more about the scientific side than I ever know. And then also he's he's the best taster I've ever met by a long shot. Dan and I were kind of more in the same. And I think Jason would be embarrassed to hear me say that. Embarrassed, but also nodding his head yes, this is true. He would be oh, come on. But then he'd look at me, he'd be but also this is all true. But Dan and I are more in the same boat. So we bounced a lot of ideas off each other. The primary thing that we focused on when we were in a group together, because we weren't always in a group together, right? We would do things like this virtually, and then we were on the same team. We had the same manager. Jason was our boss, and we would get together fairly frequently, and we would always, some of the more expense heavy things like the spike kits and all that, like we would wait till we had a group of like 8 people, 8 people to do that, right? So we get the most bang for our buck. We would also do a lot of just blind style panels when we were together and talk through why we missed stuff. But as far as the most important part of studying, in my opinion, the one that people fall short on, is a very solitary experience. Right? It's the memorizing the quants. It's the memorizing the examples of styles. At least for me, that was extremely time consuming. The flashcards of it all, right? I have actually behind me, I have a dresser over here, and I think 5 of the drawers are still all my old study material. And that was the stuff that was solo. Really,
Yeah, I think a lot of people, you see, you mentioned the Psalm documentaries, and then there's also the Brewmaster one that you were featured in, and people see like the best built for TV stuff is the tasting and the activities.
It's such a small part of it. It's not a small part of it. It's a significant part of the score, but it's a small part of the hours spent.
Yes.
I think in that documentary, which I have not watched in quite a while for a variety of reasons, mostly because I was making some bold beard and hair decisions at the time. We were just joking about this the other day, Dan and Jason and a handful of us are on a text thread, and somebody said something about, they posted it was some like Onion article, kind of making fun of like a craft beer nerd type of thing. I would make fun of this, but that guy looks so much like me in 2016. You know what I mean? They showed an image of, this is when I lived in Milwaukee, where I had this, like, it wasn't really an office. It was like a glorified closet, right, in my house in Milwaukee that was on the 2nd floor, that I just had a chair and some shelves in, and that's where I kept all my stuff. And that was like my study bunker. People don't realize the amount of hours are spent in environments like that.
Yeah, I remember when I tried doing social media stuff with flashcards, and after like the first 2 times I did it, I was like, this is just like the most boring content you could possibly
It's
like,
funny,
hey,
though.
You guys want to scroll through this Instagram thing and see if you can get this flashcard right? Like, just the absolute,
just so mind numbing.
It's just like, remember, like, nobody cares. It is very solitary in that regard. With Chris and I and the people who we studied for advanced with, and then continuing to study with each other for master, very luckily, Chris and I had very different strengths and very different weaknesses.
Yeah.
In that dynamic of you, Dan and Jason, what do you feel like you kind of helped to kind of raise the tide, and what did you think you really drew from the 2 of them?
An area that I was pretty comfortable in was brewing, because I had been professional brewer for a handful of years. I had been a home brewer for 10 plus years, and like a passionate hobbyist, right? So the brewing science side of it, I felt pretty comfortable coming in. I would typically do really well on those essays, and I also am a big fan of like just esoteric brewing and fermentation practices. I remember in the 2010, like deciding I was going to try to build a cool ship, at my house. And boy, I really wish I had a Yorkshire square in my basement. Just the dumbest, most irrelevant to 99.9% of the brewing world. I just liked historical brewing practices and things like that. So that was an area of expertise that I knew I was strong with. I think the other one probably was like, I've always been really good with descriptors, and I credit this to 2 things. One, I've always really been interested in food and culinary arts and flavor long before beer. I think I've talked about this in interviews before, but like I was obsessed with reading all of my mom's Taste of Home magazines, you know what I mean? Which was like a Midwestern cooking magazine, right? And I was obsessed with Food Network and Iron, the original Japanese version of Iron Chef. And I think it really translated to an interest in flavor development and building and assessing flavors. I'm also a writer by trade too. Like my first paid gigs in the beer industry were writing jobs, and I have a journalism background. So connecting that lizard brain, your sensory organs, primary function, which is to prevent you from eating and drinking things that make you die, that's a long jump to flowery poetic language in the form of flavor descriptors. I've always been good at bridging that gap. I equate it to, one, the culinary, interest, but also, weirdly enough, beeradvocate.com, when that was on the www.internet.com, back in, really, I want to say starting probably about 2005, I was really active on Beer Advocate and writing reviews. We talk about them as like AATMFs now, but like just sensory analysis of a beer. I was writing hundreds of those on Beer Advocate for years and years. This is so obnoxious to see somebody doing this nowadays. Like, I mean, I guess it's no different than Untapped, but I used to walk around with a notepad, an actual physical notepad, and write sensory analysis of like every beer I tried, and then go transcribe that to Beer Advocate. And I had hundreds and hundreds of reviews on there. So I had a ton of practice. You can't discredit the importance of that's something I did for fun. You know what I mean? So like I wasn't forced to get good at it. I liked doing it. So it just came very naturally. Those are probably my big strengths. And then I had a little bit of a leg up, not to say I was like remarkably good at it then, but I had a leg up in that I was a BJCP judge already. So like I didn't have to learn diacetyl and acetaldehyde and DMS and all those stuff. I already had that sensory memory. Working with those guys, Jason, hugely helpful on the chemical pathways stuff. He knows that stuff better than people in the beer industry that write about it. If I had an understanding of something and I explained it to him, or I read what was on my note card, he could oftentimes go, well, that's 70% right, and here's where you're getting confused on the Krebs cycle. And then I would go, oh, because I don't have a formal science background. Like I have an MBA and a master's in journalism, so he could just speak this language so fluently. He would really help. Really help there. And then for Dan and I think, he knew a ton about the service side of the business. He came from essentially, being like a front of house manager of GM type of thing in the restaurant industry to like being a trainer of people in that space. Dan really knew service in and out. We're not dissimilar in the sense that like he had a really natural knack for flowery descriptors and being able to pick out really relatable things and applying them to sensory experiences. It felt like we had a little bit of a perfect storm of folks there that could help each other out. And also we like to, for lack of a better term, bust each other's chops a lot, but in like a fun way, in a loving way. But we would say like horrible things, not to people, to each other. I remember we would oftentimes just try to say the most biting things to each other, in a funny way. But
Rage
I remember
bait.
We worked together, so we would have week-long classes where we would be proctors for a group of 50, 60 people for a 4 or 5 day class, and we would take turns teaching different modules. Okay, this time you're going to take glassware. Okay, this week you're going to take off flavors, whatever. And we all had our own talking points, and we got to know each other's quote unquote acts like we were stand-up comedians, so we knew where you were going to try to do a little joke, we knew where you were going to say something. And I used to do this bit, was a diagram where I would draw like the mother yeast cell and like what do you give them versus what your outputs are, right temperature and lack of competition and oxygen and amino acids and all these things, and then here's what you get on the other side, right? And I would always make this joke about like I would draw like a little happy yeast cell on like the dry erase board, and I would joke like, obviously you guys know this, but like I'm drawing this little anthropomorphized yeast cell, but if you look at a yeast cell under a microscope, it doesn't have a little smiley face. And I just mentioned something about looking at a yeast cell under a microscope, and I got back, and it got a little chuckle, and it was like, all right, everybody take like a 5-minute break, whatever. And I came back to the back of the room, sat down on my computer, and Jason goes, what do you know about microscopes? just to put me in my place. Yeah. And we would say things like that to each other a lot, which was fun because it was coming from a place of love, but it was also like a stay in your lane, kid,
definitely familiar with that kind of thing. We have our little side gig at your service where we're tinkering around with service forward pop-up events, and we did a Kolsch service event, and our buddy Charlie just casually texted the at your service group. He's like talking about how Kolsch was an ale, which is like one of the things that triggers me and gets under my skin. And he's just like, that's all he had to say. I'm like, it's loggered, and you just kind of like lose your mind. Yeah, definitely familiar with that dynamic. As you said, it's been a while since you last took the exam, but you saw the format a couple different times, and you mentioned that anything in the syllabus is on the table, obviously, just anything kind of in beer knowledge. Is there anything that you, when you look back at it, that you think should change about the exam, or were you like frustrated with any formats of the exam and maybe you don't have like a particular solution, but you're kind of wondering about it? Or do you think it's an adequate test?
There are things that I think end up being really important to the exam that I think a lot of folks, I guess including myself, might consider to be a little bit arbitrary, but they're almost like what I would describe as table stakes. Memorizing we call the quants, which is ABV, IBU, SRM, OG, FG, all the ranges for every single style. That's asinine to make somebody memorize that. The amount of times that has come up where it's actually been valuable, not very. But I will say, I grabbed this beer because I'm going to correct myself initially because I'm drinking a beer right now because I'm talking about every year. Obviously, I'm going to drink a beer, but I'm drinking a beer called Stillage from, which they call an English style ale, but Old Thunder Brewing here in Pittsburgh, which is one of the better breweries in town. And it's 4.8% ABV. It says English style. What would I call that? And I was like, well, it kind of reminds me a little bit of an ESB, but it's just slightly out of the range of Best Bidder, because I think Best Bidder finishes at 4.7. This is 4.8. So like literally it was about to say how useless that information is, but then it literally popped into my head as soon as I looked at that can. My point is, memorizing all of those quants is extremely difficult. At least for me, it was extremely difficult. But it is one of those things that I always tell people if I'm tutoring them or helping them prepare for the exam, I always say, like, you have to get 100% on those, because those are free points that you either get or you don't get. You either know the information or you don't know the information. It sucks to have to sit there and spend dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of hours memorizing all this information. But once you have it, you get 100% on that section. And those are points you need. 3 months later, I've forgotten 30% of those numbers, and every time I took the exam 3 times, and every single time I didn't have to start from scratch, obviously, but I had to study those quants every single time. Maybe other people, they're cemented in their mind. For me, it was not. I had to, every time I prepared for the exam, spend dozens of hours memorizing those quants. Some people would say, like, that's so stupid. How does that really affect your beer knowledge, your level, to be a beer educator, whatever? It doesn't, but it demonstrates the level of commitment you have to get there. It's a bit of a litmus test. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something I would change. It's just the nature of proctoring this exam, once a year. It does feel like it would be more beneficial to have it at like a different location more frequently. I remember back in the day, it was, they do the brewing section quite often at Goose Clybourne. Then for years they did it at Dovetail, which I don't. Do they probably still do it at Dovetail?
This coming year, it's going to be at the Goose Island Barrel House.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And the 2 years before that, it was at Boulevard in Kansas City. They did it at Sugar Creek at Joe Vogelbacher's place. So post-pandemic, once they kind of moved away from the office space in Chicago, it became a lot less like, we're going to keep doing the master exam in Chicago. And yeah. And so now it's more like, who has space for us? Obviously, Boulevard, Neil's connected there. Goose is in Chicago. Jason's still there. So Joe Vogelbacher was probably chomping at the bit to have the master exam at Sugar Creek.
Yeah.
That actually has become more commonplace.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I have not been in person for a master exam in a very long time. I grade essays every year. That's about it. But that's good to switch it up.
When you were taking it the first time, had they already moved to 10-minute oral exams, or were they still in the 30-minute? Because I know that was a change at some point.
I think it changed. Boy, again, I'm thinking back over a decade. I think it changed between the first and second or second and third time I took the exam. Because the first time I took it, I think they were doing the full 30-minute thing.
Yeah. And that makes sense. That seems to be how Dan talks about his experience too. So that would line up.
I do remember a couple of those oral exams early on, like spending a lot of time with one person. And then that, because you're
like, it's not even about this. It's just like, should we really be spending this much time together? We don't even know each other.
Yeah, I remember sitting there spending an inordinate amount of time just staring at people and like, should I say more things? Like, have I said the right things? Have I not said the right things?
Because that was one of my suggestions in my interview was I think some should just be different amounts of time. I think there are some where it seems like if this were actually real world practical, like just having 10 minutes seems absurd and doesn't seem like the mark of mastering something, and doing it in 15 would be just as hard if it's some sort of in-person troubleshooting scenario. I think it's maybe a little bit more realistic to what would actually be happening. And Jen when we did her episode, she was like, I think everybody should get to choose one proctor and you get 2 minutes to explain something you forgot so that you can prove to them you're not stupid and you just panicked in the moment. Like, hers was very funny, so it doesn't have to be, do we hope that Dan and Jason will watch this and think, gosh, that's a good idea, we should, of course, like, why wouldn't we want to be part of that? But we're also open to anything where it's like, even if you're just like, they should just be coming up with the next hardest exam, like there should just be super master, like that should be the next change, like that's fun to talk about too.
At some point too, you run the risk of taking a proctor into an area that they are not that comfortable being a proctor in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There might be somebody who is teaching you about Cascale and going through the parts and functionality and all those things of a beer engine. But if you went down the realm of talking to them about, sour beer production and the things you might or might not benefit from having a cool ship, for example, I don't know, that might be out of their depth. I tend to like the ultra specific, super focused. You are talking to the person that is the person globally that knows as much or more about this particular thing than anyone else in the English speaking world.
Oh, absolutely.
And focus on that.
One of the things we personally did a lot was we sought out a lot of advice, even, studying for advanced, but then even beyond that, because I mean, even when we were studying for advanced, we'll get to this later, but you were somebody who didn't do advanced. You kind of just went from, level from certified to master. And a lot of people that we had heard, it was people don't really like to respond, or we've even heard things as harsh as like, I figured it out without any help. You're going to do it too. Like if you really want to do this.
Yeah. Some people are dicks. There's a lot of there's certainly a lot of gatekeeping type of things, right? I have always been, because I remember what it's like to seek help, because when I first started, there was just so little information out there about it. And when I found people that were really helpful and forthcoming with information, even if just like, I just want you to tell me if I'm wasting my time. That's all. That was really valuable when I got that. I made a somewhat jaded, grumpy old man comment at the beginning about people asking you to do things for free. That's not what I'm talking about. I've had tons of people reach out to me over the years that are preparing for the Master Cicerone exam, and I try to always be as open and honest with their questions as possible. And I always try to take a little bit of extra time. I'm not saying this to be like, oh, I'm such a martyr over here, right? I'm such a good guy. You cannot answer people's questions about what they need to spend time on and how they need to study and what areas they need to focus on unless you know a little bit about their background and their areas of expertise. Because talking to you guys versus talking to, when M. Sauter was preparing for the exam, asking her about something, like her background is different than you guys' background. Different people who've reached out to me and talked to over the years have very, very different backgrounds. And I can't tell them what they need to focus on or not focus on if I don't know that. So at least have a face-to-face conversation so I can try to not steer them down the wrong path.
One of the most iconic moments in us getting ready for the advanced exam and we're getting able to work with you for a little bit was when we were asking those kind of questions about how to prepare and what things to do. You kind of just looked at us and you were like, you can't suck at anything, guys. Like you got to be kind of good at everything to pass this exam. This may be a little bit different type of question to ask you, someone that was super close on your attempts before you passed, but was there a moment for you where all the pieces kind of came together, or was it just like one thing that you had to improve on, or was it getting your 1/10% in 5 different areas?
I was going to say no, but I think there is one moment here, but it's not maybe what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. The most important moment for me was when I failed the second time, because the first time I came so close and I felt like I was just throwing shit against the wall and see what sticks. I studied more for the third time than I did for the first and second combined by a long shot. I did not study nearly as much as I needed to the first time, and I came really close. The worst thing that could have happened to me in the first time is coming really close, because I thought, well, I'm basically there.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't realize that 1.5 percentage points can be cavernous. A couple things could have went the wrong way in the tasting, and I could have missed by 8 points. So the second time, I just thought like, oh, I just need to tighten up these few areas and I'm golden. I'm gonna waltz through this. Just arrogant, right? Is the only way to describe that. So I did considerably worse the second time. I missed it by like a point, it was something like 83.4, 83.6 the first time. The second time was like 81.5 or 82. So the third time is when I really dedicated myself to this, like, I am going to leave no stone unturned, if you will, or maybe a better analogy would be like, I'm not going to leave anything up to chance. I'm going to make myself like undeniable. So that was the approach that I took. Moment where it like kind of clicked, where I was like, I think I might have done this, was after the exam. After the third time I took it, I called Jason literally the night. It was like the night it had just ended. Like I was going back to my hotel, I was flying back home the next morning, and he was, waiting to hear like how you had done. This is obviously almost a decade before he owned the program, or we worked together at the time. And he was like eager to hear how I did. I called him, and I remember I was just like pacing outside my hotel in Chicago. And I'm explaining, just like word vomit, all the things that, I wish I would have done this better, but I know I fucking nailed this. And excuse my language. I knew I nailed this, and that was really good. That was a layup. This is pretty good. Just all the emotions coming out. And Jason goes, sounds like you did it. I couldn't see it in that moment because my brain was going 1,000 miles an hour and all stuff. Yeah. And he was like, so where did you bomb? The first year when I came close, I left an essay almost completely blank. The time management was an absolute mess the first time. Second time, slightly better time management, but fell short in some other areas, including tasting. The third time, reciting all these things, and he was like, I don't see the whole. I don't see where you came up short in any of these things. Not to backtrack too much, but I think one of the things that, I don't know if I would change it, and I don't know how I feel about this, but the essay writing by hand is something that you don't. I've told people who I've helped tutor or whatever for the exam, I give them an essay, practice essay, and they would write, hey, no, I feel really comfortable with this subject matter, whatever, but did you write the essay? Well, no, I didn't write the essay, but I know this subject matter really good. No, you have to physically practice writing essays, because you have to strengthen your hand to be able to write that many pages. And that sounds so silly and so over dramatic. I'm nothing if not verbose, which I'm sure people have picked up on, who've been listening to me talk already. I write a lot, and I remember being 2/3 the way through it, my hand was shaking so bad that like my writing was illegible. I don't know how. I feel horrible for whoever graded my essays the first time around, because I literally had not strengthened my hand enough, to write that much and make it legible. You have to physically practice writing essays in a timed fashion, because you have to be able to write fast and write a crap load, and for your hand to not tire out. It sounds so silly, but I remember feeling so stupid the first time, going like, I can't do it. My hand has given out.
And anyone out there looking to take the exam, think about the last time you hand wrote for 3 hours straight. And it's probably a long time ago, if at all.
Yeah. I'd love to go back and see like how many pages I actually wrote, because it varies dramatically. And just judge it, or grading essays, there'll be certain essays that I'll grade and somebody will write a page and I'll be like, I would have written 5. You know what I mean? And that page was probably not enough, and my 5 might be too much, or my 8 or however much I would have written would probably be too much, and the right answer is probably 3 or 4. Yeah, I mean, I wrote like 80-90 pages handwritten the first time I took that exam, and it's just like, by the end it was probably so long because my writing was 2 spaces high and illegibly scribbled. You guys you're closer to this than I am nowadays, I'm sure, but like, is there any discussion around making it typed? I feel like at some point they said they were going to, but it never happened.
We got a little bit of the history of why, Ray was a little hesitant to do it. I think the biggest thing that I learned from Dan and Jason was not whether or not they kind of believed philosophically whether or not it should happen. I think they're just learning what it takes to run this entire program. I'm going to be very interested to ask both of them, like, can you just kind of put into perspective, like, what does it mean to just change the syllabus, like the syllabus update that they did, when they first kind of came on. It's simple. They're not going to be revealing any big secret. Tell us exactly what that entails. Because even if you're just thinking how many languages is the syllabus in, that's already a much bigger thing than just, don't we just change the PDF on the website? It's way
much, there's a lot of reverberations around that.
So I think that's the big thing that I learned, is that there is no easy change. Changing one thing is just not easy, and it seems easy on the outside, but I think there just is a lot that we don't understand internally and structurally about the business. From what I've heard, is there are certain things where they're like, this is just going to be what is part of the exam, and we are open to maybe X or Y. I think the handwriting is under that.
You just have to think about, like, how would you logistically do that, because you could not allow people to use their own computers, right? For obvious reasons. So you'd have to have computers for everyone, right? Or at the very least tablets with a keypad, and then you have to accommodate people's needs from a keypad perspective. And I totally get why it's a logistical challenge. I just remember years back when Ray, was running things, or even when Ray was more actively running, because I think in the latter years when Ray was involved, he wasn't as active in some of this stuff. I remember him talking about, we're going to make this change at some point, or maybe somebody on his staff saying that, and then obviously it didn't happen.
For me personally, I think for parts of the exam, I would want it to be optional. There are certain parts of the tasting exam I would not want to be required to type. I would rather have a beer in my hand and a pen in the other one, and be able to do both at the same time.
I can't imagine typing it out. I can't imagine typing it out. I'm also not a fast typist. It's borderline.
That's the thing. For essays, I would want the ability to type, and it's also just because we got the benefit of being sort of I think we were the second advanced exam that was written online, and just seeing how very simple that was, and then doing the master exam where it was like, you can just put the cursor in the middle of the page and start typing where you forgot to, and you don't have to try and draw this map of arrows to figure out where they need to start reading this thing that's on the back page, but start reading it here, follow the arrow to the other page, and
I've seen some stuff when I'm creating.
I was going to say, you can probably tell at this point which one is day one and, essay one, and which one is like calling in backup and you're moving your hand with your other hand, and
the amount of erasing that's happened and scribbling out, and
for some of the questions I crossed out entire pages once I realized I had done, whether it was some incorrect math. It's going to be easier to just start over, and otherwise they're going to have no clue what's going on. There are definitely people who it doesn't seem to bother them, and there are people that we know of who have attempted the exam before, and they will only consider doing it again unless they can type out the essay portion. It's a little bit all over the place, but I want to get back to kind of your what seems like a roller coaster between your attempts and kind of learning how you had to approach it. For somebody who did have to take it, like so many people, 3 times before you passed, are you happy with the way that journey turned out, or do you kind of wish you could go back and kind of understand, like, I really just was that close? And a lot of people, they enjoy the journey and are happier with the sort of beer professional that they kind of became, or what they learned along the way doing it 3 times. Would you go back and change it if you could, and just say, I get that extra 1.5%?
I knew I was a bit of a guinea pig for my group of folks who I was the first one to take it. I don't begrudge anything that happened the first time around. I think the thing that really hurt me the second time, I thought I was really close the first time, but actually wasn't as close as I thought I was. The thing that put an enormous amount of extra stress on me and was a detriment to me psychologically and emotionally was the documentary that you mentioned. It was a great experience overall. I got really great experiences out of it, but at times it was an enormous, unnecessary additional layer of stress. I'll tell the abridged version of the story, but worked for what was then Miller Coors at the time. Full disclosure, work for them now. I left, worked for some craft suppliers for about 5 years, came back around, and now I work for the same company, which is now called Molson Coors. At the time, we worked for 10th and Blake, which was the craft and import division of Molson Coors, which no longer exists. But this included brands like Blue Moon and Leinenkugel and big stuff like that. We had Terrapin and some of those brands that Tilray ended up absorbing. But we also had 2 import brands, which are still part of the Molson Coors portfolio, which are Peroni and Pilsner Urquell. And I've had a long time infatuation with Pilsner Urquell and Czech brewing culture at large. But my interest in Czech brewing, Czech beer styles and Czech brewing culture and all that stuff really started through the lens of Pilsner Urquell. Love that beer. I mean, I met Bill and Hagen from Dovetail before the exam was there, before they even opened the place up or getting ready to open the place up, because we had an event in Chicago where we had a keg of unfiltered, unpasteurized Pilsner Urquell that we had flew in for the Czech Republic, and we were tapping with the side pour. This is a bitter side note. The incredible popularity of the Lucre faucets and side pour faucets now is so cool, but also frustrating, because I worked for 6-8 years trying to convince people how cool side pour fonts were when only Pilsner Urquell was doing them. I mean, we used to just get torn apart. You're putting the tap inside the beer. You guys are idiots. I remember doing an educational video for the Miller Coors YouTube page over a decade ago. It was probably a decade ago, and just getting blown up in the comments. It's like, this dickhead's putting the tap in the beer, and now it's like, it's the cool kid thing to do, which is, again, I'm being a bitter old curmudgeon. Pilsner Urquell was a bigger part of our portfolio then. And they had hired this documentary filmmaker named Doug, and I don't remember Doug's last name right now. Anyway, he had done a few higher profile things. He had done a project, something about with Saturday Night Live, and they hired him to do one to talk about the origins of Pilsner Urquell and how influential it was as the first golden lager beer, and now everything's golden lager beer and blah blah blah. I was supporting the Pilsner Urquell brand team at the time from an education perspective, basically just kind of being their subject matter expert for stuff. Before they put it out, they'd be like, are we saying this right, or does this sound stupid? And I would say no, don't say that, say it this way or whatever. So that was a small facet of my job. We were on a call and they were talking about how they were going to the Czech Republic to shoot this movie, and Jason, who was my boss at the time, was like, we should try to figure out how to go on this trip. So we were on the call, and it was just one of those shoot your shot moments. And I had been to the Czech Republic before, but on my own dime, my wife and I, on vacation kind of thing. And it had been a couple of years. I obviously really wanted to go back. I don't know if Jason had been there yet. And we were like, we should probably come as subject matter experts, subject matter consultants on this trip. And they were like, yeah, that's a good idea. You probably should. And we were like, ooh, okay. And then they eventually put us out. So we got to, go on this trip on the company dime to the Czech Republic for a week. And then also, of course, Jason and I made a longer trip out of it. We went to Munich and Cologne and Dusseldorf and Berlin, and we jumped all around Germany and stuff. But we flew into Pilsen, flew into Prague, went to Pilsen, and we were just tag along. We were just stowaways on this trip, just there to drink beer, right? And we were in the pub, basically at the employee pub at the Pilsner Urquell Brewery at 10 in the morning. And of course, beers are flowing, right? And they're doing these interviews with, I think it was Václav Burka, who was the brewmaster at the time, third generation brewmaster at Pilsner Urquell. They interviewed Jason for it. He had just passed the Master Cicerone exam, had just passed it. He mentioned to the director that I was getting ready to take it for the second time. And he was like, would you want to get interviewed? And I said, yeah, hey, I'm a liter and a half deep at 10 in the morning. Yeah, I'll get interviewed. So I hopped on there, flapping my gums. And for whatever reason, the director decided that he wanted to shift the idea of this story to see people's beer journeys in the modern craft beer landscape and then tie them to the history of Pilsner Urquell and all that stuff. He wanted to follow me around preparing for this exam. He was infatuated with the idea of the exam. He also found another home brewer lived in Brooklyn, I think, who wanted to be a professional brewer, and it was So that was another like kind of storyline. You know, he followed us around the Czech Republic and got footage of us talking to people about beer and blah, blah, blah. And then followed us around for maybe 6 months afterwards studying. I mean, they sent a film crew to my house and showed me like recording and all this stuff. I'll be honest with you, I had like some mixed feelings about the whole thing. And my wife was very against it because she was like, this is just adding way more pressure than you need kind of thing. And I was kind of like, do I really want this? I'm not really not that I wasn't sure how to say no, but I was like, am I just being petty? So I stuck with it. And then they literally followed me to the exam. They were there on exam day, interviewing me before and after and all this stuff. And it was just like by far the most stressful experience of my life. Then they sent them to my house for me to sit there and eat the shit sandwich on camera and talk about how I didn't pass again. It was a real kick in the gut. And for months afterwards, I was like, I hope this thing never comes out. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I had decided I was going to take it again. And I told myself it was going to be the last time. Realistically, it probably wasn't going to be the last time. I was going to die before I didn't pass this exam, right? So I took it again. And then it was just about to get released. They were releasing it South by Southwest in Austin. And they wanted me to go down for the thing. I don't want to have anything to do with this. This has been really an unpleasant experience. Well, then I passed. Sorry, I said this was going to be a short story and it's not. The second time I took it, when I was getting my results back, the director asked me to film myself getting the call from Ray. He was like, can I send a film crew to your house when you get the call from Ray? I said, no. I don't want that, but I will record myself. So I set up my iPad up on, and I was recording myself. And of course I got bad news from Ray the second time. And as soon as it happened, I was just upset. I just turned it off and deleted it. And he was like, hey, did you? And I was like, I got bad news. He was like, well, did you record it? I was like, I deleted it. No, I'm not interested. Well, then when I took the next time, they wanted me to do it again. And I was like, no, I'm over this, right? But my wife luckily had the foresight to like at least take a couple photos of me on the phone with Ray getting the good news that I passed. When they found out I passed, they were like, did you record it? I was like, no, I didn't record it. I wasn't thinking about you, Doug, right? When this happened. Yeah. So they ended up putting a little addendum basically at the end. It has a little title card and says he passed it. He's got a picture of me with a big shit-eating grin on my face, right? So I was like, okay, now it has at least a happy ending for me. So I ended up going to South by Southwest for the premiere, did all these like Q&As on a big stage with all these people and stuff. And it was really fun. The first time I did not expect to have this experience, but the first time they did the world premiere, it was a theater, right? And there was a lot of people there, had to be 1,000+ people there. And they showed it. Whenever at the end, the thing came up and said, Brian took it a year later and he passed, the place started, kind of, everybody was clapping and hooting and hollering. And I just started bawling, because it was like an really emotional roller coaster. And this is the first time I had seen the film since that was added in. That was something I don't know that I would change, but there were definitely times during that experience where I was like, I wish I would have never agreed to do this. But like, it did come out in the wash, in a good place. When I'm dying of a heart attack from stress, when I'm 55, maybe I'll be like, well, looking back on that, maybe I didn't want that maybe that was unnecessary stress. Maybe that did take a decade off my life, but in retrospect, it worked out all right.
Well, if you feel like anything was unduly stressful or even cringe about it, maybe take some solace in the only thing more cringe is that I know that I've watched that more than you have. So
yeah. I have not watched it in many years. They did send me a DVD copy of it, so I'm sure it's still on streaming somewhere. It is. Yeah, it was on Amazon Prime for years. Yep. It's probably on freaking Tubi or something now.
Well, two funny comments about that. One is when we were studying for the advanced exam, Scott and I passed the written at the same time, but then due to travel stuff, he took the tasting before I did. And then I took the next tasting. And then in the wake of that, we got our study friend Anadeep, who lived in India, to fly to the US and stay with us and study for the tasting. And he's tasting commercial examples for the first time, and we're kind of like trying to condense a year of study into just a few weeks leading up to the exam. But we had the the thought, should we film all this and maybe put something together, even if it's just like guerrilla footage or whatever. And we ended up airing against it, and partly just because of the time investment more than the nerves or anything, I think. And I'm glad in hindsight that we did, because it probably would have just added some element of pressure that's maybe not necessary.
Well, at least it was like it was on you and you could do what you want with it. Not to belabor the documentary thing at all, but this Doug guy who was this director from New York, he and I never saw eye to eye. We butted heads from the very beginning because he was a very, what you would think of as like the most stereotypical New York documentarian that you can imagine, like really boisterous, what I perceived as very pushy. And so he and I, even from that trip in the Czech Republic, like he and I butted heads a few times because he would try to get us to do things or say things on camera that I didn't feel comfortable with. And I would just like say no. And then he would get frustrated. And then eventually we did have a bit of a blow up on that trip. And like, I haven't talked to this guy in 10 years, so who gives a shit? We were walking through this like square. I think we were in Prague at that point. I don't think we were in Pilsen. And he was walking backwards with the cameraman. Jason and I were just walking, and he was just getting some like footage of us, right? Just some B-roll type of thing. He wanted us to do something. And I was like, no, that's dumb, Doug. Shut up. Like, I just had enough, Doug, for that day.
Yeah.
And then he like slipped on, like somebody had spilled something and fell like ass over tin cups backwards. Got really upset and really embarrassed and took that moment just to like vomit all his frustrations with me out. And then we had a big argument. And I was like, Doug, I never signed anything yet. Like, I could just tell you to F off right now. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm personally, like, I'm leaning towards that direction because I kind of hate you. We ended up having, our relationship was mended a little bit. I remember, after months and months of not seeing him or talking to him, we kind of convened when we were at South by Southwest, and it was water under the bridge. But I know there was some time there where I was, speaking of bridge, I wanted to throw off a bridge at one point. But at least in you guys' scenario was like, it was in more of a trusting environment with friends.
Yeah,
what I mean? Yeah. But I can see why that would have added more stress still.
Well, and the second thing that is hilarious, given the story that you've told, and also the fact that you mentioned Jason and Dan knowing the exact way to needle you, is the very next question I had teed up was about you teaching about Lucre faucets 10-12 years ago, and where it feels like traditional and emerging service methods are kind of having a little bit of a moment in the US now. Are you just sitting over there like, where the hell were all of you 10 years ago? Or is it like pretty cool?
I know it's pretty cool. Like there's a new Czech beer bar that just opened here in Pittsburgh called the Bohemian. And it's all Lucre faucets. And it's like, I remember we used to drive hours to go someplace that just had like some semblance of an authentic Czech beer service, right? Or Kolsch service for that matter. I was blown away by this. I was in Louisville, Kentucky a few weeks ago. Went to a place called Holy Grail in Louisville. And I went in there because I heard they had Kolsch service. I was like, random. I went in there. It was Dovetail Kolsch, believe it or not, which was crazy. We used to drive all over just to have those types of service experiences, and now they're everywhere, right? Which is great. The one thing that I am a little bit bitter about is the lack of, at least in where I live, like cask beer has not come back after COVID. Like there's so few places that are doing even firkins on a regular basis. It's very top of mind to me because just a few weeks ago I spent 8 days in London, York, and Edinburgh, just literally drinking cask beer for 8 straight days. We went to all these incredible historic cask ale pubs, and so I'm a little bit going through withdrawal right now. But with the exception of like the brewery that I just was talking about, Old Thunder, and a couple more, you just very rarely see a beer that has a regularly functioning beer engine. I'm waiting for that to get hip again. I briefly flirted with the idea of opening a brewery a couple of times over the years, but one went down the path of like kind of starting to plan things out a little bit right before COVID, of course. And the idea was we were going to do a Czech brewery and pub. It was going to be a 10-degree pale, a 12-degree pale, and a 13-degree dark, and that was it. And maybe a Politomavi when we were feeling froggy, but otherwise it was going to be those beers and mixes of those beers. And now there's like, I feel like every city has a place with that model now.
Yeah.
It probably was a few years early. And again, COVID, I'm glad we didn't pull the trigger on it. It is fun to see those things that we pushed so hard for a decade ago, like now feeling more naturally coming to fruition. When you're an early adopter for those types of things, and you're kind of at the bleeding edge of any hobby or any interest group, most of the time when you're into it, it's probably a little early for the general public. I'll take solace in that.
Shifting gears a little bit, and I think most people know that you have a well-known love of spooky season. So I want to.
I don't know if you can see any of my office behind me, but that's just one of the this wall over here.
Oh my!
There
gosh.
we go.
Wow. Like those are two of the walls of my office. It's just it's all horror memorabilia and posters and everything. Yeah,
amazing. I want you to pair some beer styles with iconic horror or Halloween characters. Okay, I'll shoot out the character and you give me a style, and it doesn't even have to make sense. Let's just have some fun with it. First is Candyman.
I mean, Candyman has got to be, by the name alone, you want to go with some sort of like big lactose pastry stout or something, because that's as close as you can get as candy. But also Caprini Greens, which is the housing development from the movie, is in Chicago. So that makes me want to go towards like a Chicago beer. I'll say Dovetail Lager, because Caprini Greens, even though it's nowhere close to it, it's a Chicago beer, and that's when I think Chicago beer, I think Dovetail, or I don't know, or Daisy Cutter, maybe one or the other. But I'll go with the Chicago beer. I'll say Dovetail Lager.
Let's throw it way back and ask about Count Dracula.
My brain's going in two directions. One is I want to go to a Baltic Porter, because I want to go to that area geographically. Carpathian Mountains. Baltic Porter is the only style I can think of that's even remotely close to the Carpathian Mountains. But the other thing I also want to say is, like, one of the most iconic lines from the great Bela Lugosi in that movie is, "I don't drink wine." So I immediately want to go to some sort of like wine infused or grape infused beer, just to be a nod to that. But I'll go with the Baltic Porter. When I think that movie, I think of A Long Voyage, right? I think of the voyage of the Demeter and all that. So perhaps a beer that might be able to withstand a voyage like that.
How about Leatherface?
Oh, that's a good one. Leatherface from, of course, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm going to say, oh man, I could go in a couple different directions. My first thing I immediately thought was, I want to do some sort of smoked beer, because if you know anything about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the sequels as well, especially Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is actually such an underappreciated movie. They run a barbecue restaurant. There's the whole chili cook-off scene in the second movie and all that stuff. So I immediately wanted to go to like a route beer, some sort of smoked beer. And I know the beer is, I know it's not set in Kentucky, it's set in Texas. My brain wanted to go to Kentucky Common for some reason, because I wanted to go to some sort of just like cheap present use beer that you're just going to brew fast, quick, dirty, and grimy, and condition it and drink it.
Love it. I got two more for you. Okay, next is Freddy Krueger.
My brain doesn't immediately go to the first movie. It goes to some of the more corny versions in later sequels. One of my favorite scenes, and I'm gonna forget, I think it's in actually the fourth version, because third is Dream Warriors, which is the best one in the franchise.
Okay.
And I think 4 is Dream Child. There's a scene, I think it's in 4, where Freddy has the faces of his victims, the kids, are meatballs on a pizza, and he's stabbing the pizza with his claws, and it's like this dream sequence, obviously. So I think of that pizza sequence, and it makes me think of what beer that goes particularly well with pizza. I don't know why. That's where my brain went. That's a long way to go. But I'm going to say Anchor Steam. Anchor Steam, I maintain to this day, is the greatest beer for pizza of all time.
Hey.
Well, all right. Well, if anybody has listened to or followed this show for a long time, you understand where our influence comes from, because we constantly talk about like Anchor Steam, Bass Ale, like your mid-strength amber beers with hop character, malt character, and a little bit of yeast character are just like your Swiss Army knife and are just the best. So,
some of my favorite experiences of drinking that beer, which I adore, which I haven't had in a long time, and I know now that it might be a while until I have it fresh again. It's been, eating bar food and hammering anchors. So
last but not least, I'm going to take a little psychological thriller turn for you, and we'll go with Annie Wilkes from Misery.
Oh, yeah. I'm a big Stephen King fan. Some of the more memorable scenes, and sometimes I forget what parts are in the book and what parts are in the movie. She's a DIYer. She's a homesteader. She doesn't like to leave. She doesn't like to go to town if she doesn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to be making something in her basement. What she's going to be drinking is probably something that she made herself. I'm going to go back to the first beer I ever brewed myself, first style of beer I ever brewed myself as a home brewer, which was just a good old-fashioned American pale ale. She's a woman of sturdy constitution, right? I think she would drink something a little bit more substantive. So we'll say American pale. I'll say an all throwback, old school American pale ale.
Or maybe in true homebrew fashion, her dilution rate's off and it ends up being like a double IPA or something.
Yeah, or the opposite. Yeah, I remember the first homebrew I ever made on my own. The first one I ever made was a Sam Adams cherry wheat clone, like from a kit. But I remember the first one I ever made, like actually tried to develop a recipe for, was it was basically supposed to be a Sierra Nevada pale ale clone. Tasted nothing like it. Used some ancient whole cone hops that were, from the bottom shelf of the homebrew store. That's the beer I'm imagining that Annie might try to make.
Kind of have a couple of different kind of either or scenarios that we're going to throw your way. So before the show, we were talking a lot about baseball. Which scenario is more exciting? Thrift store shopping, garage sale, flea market, and you just find that perfect piece of glassware that's got the great price tag on it, and it's just not something you're ever going to be able to buy, even online or in the depths of eBay, or the Pirates win the division. Which one is...
Oh, man. I mean, I'm going to say the Pirates win the division because that seems less likely. I'm a diehard Pittsburgh Pirates fan. I have had that thrill of finding great glassware. There's glasses that I've seeked out for. What I'm drinking out of one that I searched high and low for a week when I was in the UK last month. I had this glass once upon a time and I broke it, and I found the new it's this Theakston's glass, like proper Theakston's pint, and like not too heavy. It's just I've luckily had that experience where I've found some really awesome glasses over the years, and I have too many, so I'm actively trying to shed glasses. The reality of the Pirates winning the division would be that comes much less frequent.
There you go. There you go.
Here's another silly one. We know your love of beer and food pairing. For the rest of your life, you could either only pair beer with cheese, or you could only use Czech pale lager to pair with food, but you can't pair with cheese. Which one are you picking?
No. Almost all the best pairings are cheese pairings.
That's 100% true. It's so true.
Trust me, I love all manner of cured meats. I've been on a real tinned fish kick as well. At least I don't know if it is where you guys are, but right now that's like kind of a hipster thing, right? Is like these places that have like tinned fish. I've had some really fantastic pairings with that. Of the 20 most memorable beer and food pairings I've ever had, 10 are probably with cheese. So I'll go with column A.
Beautiful.
Last kind of thing before we kind of outro here, we definitely did some scouring through your Instagram and found a doozy of one from Christmas Eve 2012, and it's a picture of 7 different beers, and the caption is, "These will maybe last us until dinner." I don't know if you've maybe seen the trend going around on social media where you're kind of ranking, things 1 through 5 or 1 through 7 or whatever, and then you get one, but you don't know what's coming next. Hopefully you don't remember all 7 of them. Maybe you remember
I do
one.
not. 2012, I do not remember now.
And I will say that some of these beers that we looked at have undergone name changes, bottle format changes. Some of them, I asked Chris, I said, I don't even know what that is. And he's like, that's what this beer used to originally look like when it was packaged. First one, and you can put this anywhere, Korsendonk Triple.
Oh yeah, Korsendonk is a beer, not even just the triple, but Korsendonk, was it called Noel? What was the Korsendonk Christmas Ale? I think it was called Noel for the longest time.
It's just called Christmas Ale now, yeah.
Was one that I would always get. Korsendonk Triple, if I recall, a little less attenuated than I would like your standard triple to be. I'll put that at 5.
Okay, and we've got 7 coming at you.
Yeah, you've got 7 spots.
Oh, I've got 7. Okay, I'll put it at 6 then.
Okay,
so
6 is great.
6 is off the table. Yeah.
Next one, St. Louis Goose Fond Tradition.
Oh yeah, I like that one. Not my favorite goose in the world, but it's a good middle of the pack goose. Goose in general is among my favorite beers. I'll put it at 4.
Next one, Omegang Bier de Hoogmont. So I think that's their beer de garde.
Don't remember that one too much. I would say 90% of the beer de gardes I've ever had were disappointing. Who made
the
it?
7th spot.
Omegang.
I mean,
I love Brewery Omegang. I'll put it 7.
Next one is Brewery Saison Roux. So that's our rye saison with 100% Brettanomyces, and it's an amber saison.
Amber saison doesn't sound that awesome to me, but the brewery doesn't make bad beer, so I'm sure it was good. I'll put it at 3. I'm holding out for the real special ones at the top here.
Next one is this is the one that when I was looking at the picture, I was like, Chris, I can't tell what this is, and he's like, oh, this is the bottling kind of used to look like. So Le Chouffe Nice Chouffe, their Christmas beer.
I love Le Chouffe. I love everything they make.
Same.
That's a beer I buy every single year. I have so many Le Chouffe glasses. I'll put Nice Chouffe at 2. I'm making that classic mistake, by the way, that everyone makes, which is leave one open till the end and put all your eggs in one basket.
That's right. And then the next one, again, another one that I think kind of underwent a name change, and I think so we'll call it what it's called now, but I think this is what is now called Vandergenst Rood Bruin.
Oh, yeah.
So, but I think back then it was called Belgium's Bruin.
It's an old school Ode Bruin, which was a little bit on the sweet side, if I remember that beer. Not my favorite in the Ode Bruin style. I'll put that at 5.
Well, you lucky duck. You lucky duck.
You lucky. No, I think you did pretty good, because the last one that was in the picture front and center is Orval.
Yeah, can't go wrong. Orval.
Nailed it.
I mean, I got the best 4 beers there in the top 4. I've got the Goose, I got the one from the brewery, Nice Chouffe, and Orval. I could have switched Nice Chouffe and Orval if I wanted to. I feel pretty good about that.
No, that's
ranking.
pretty good. And these are usually 5, so I think doing this for 7, I think you did very well. I think you did very well.
That.
Yeah,
I do not remember that night. I probably didn't remember that night the next night.
It sure seems like that, right?
I have a feeling I was with my brother and my cousins, and Belgian beers and barley wines get broken out on Christmas Eve. So,
well, those are all the questions we have. Is there any cool beer stuff that you're excited about or getting into these days, or want to give a shout out to before we leave?
Like I said, I'm on a bit of a cask kick. I actually have some friends who own a brewery here in Pittsburgh, which is called Late Edition Brewing. They make some really, really nice classic styles, and I'm going to go take my pin over to, because they're filling up some firkins and some pins for distribution this week. They're going to fill it for me for Father's Day weekend. I don't know when this is coming out, not to date the show, but this coming weekend is Father's Day weekend. So I'm going to tuck into some cask ale this weekend and, I don't know, probably play some golf and watch some baseball and just do stereotypical dad things.
We met Brian years and years ago, and it's always really fun to figure out a reason to catch up, and this lived up to everything that I was hoping it would be, and it was awesome to have you, buddy, and it's good to see you, and thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm glad we would do. Good to catch up with you guys. I know we chat online, but I haven't got to talk to you guys live and in person for a while. So
if you are a Master Cicerone and you're watching this and we haven't reached out, and we'll interview you next, we're just kind of trying to make sure we can stay organized with who we're contacting. That's why we're not just kind of sending out an email to everyone. But if you're excited, reach out to us. Everybody, thank you so much for watching this episode. We hope you're enjoying the series. Make sure to follow us on all the social media platforms. We're at The Beer Enthusiasts. Like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you guys for the next episode. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, guys.